אושר גדול לראות כאן הרבה פרצופים מוכרים וברוכים הבאים לכל מי שמצטרף אלינו היום בפעם הראשונה. ברוכים הבאים לקהילה שלנו. And now I will turn to English on behalf of our guest. Welcome to the International Science Journalist Panel between Science, Knowledge and Opinion. Before I introduce the moderator and the panelists, let me set the scene by giving you a really brief comparative overview of the status of scientific communication in Israel. When we talk about the science achievements of Israel, we are used to being part of the leading countries. It could be Nobel Prizes, winning European Union grant money, the number of scientific publications per capita, ranking of top universities. Really, whatever the criteria we use, we expect Israeli science nothing less than world domination, or at least being at the top. But the situation is sadly very different for science communication in Israel. So this is the MACES project, monitoring policy and research activities on science and society in Europe, and it involved 37 countries, among them Israel. The report about Israel was written by Professor and Professor Nadav, whom you'll meet later, and they submitted the report that gives general overview of the science and society situation of Israel in 2011, which means that they probably did the research in 2010. Now in 2012, a group of researchers from Denmark took the 37 national reports and tried to cluster the countries according to different criteria. They did clustering according to the use of science in policy making, public engagement in science and technology, and science communication culture. Now I will spend really 2-3 minutes about telling you what they found about science communication culture in Israel. So they took the 37 countries and they divided them into 3 clusters: consolidated, developing, and fragile science communication culture. Now, Israeli science is usually found here, with the Western countries, with the big countries, but we were clustered here, in the fragile cluster, with Albania, Bulgaria, Croatia, Czech Republic, Lithuania, and Macedonia. What's important about these countries is that actually many of them used to have developed science communication culture in the communist era, but when the communism fell with it the infrastructure that allowed science communication, for example, the magazine. So what were the parameters for the clustering? They looked into the level of infrastructure, the science sections on the newspapers, science shows on TV, science magazines, etc. They looked at political attention to the issue, scale and diversity of actors involved, meaning how many different institutions and organizations are involved in science communication, tradition for popularization within academia, public interest in science and technology, and training and organizational characteristics of science journalism. Now, the consolidated group showed intense activity on 3 or more of these criteria. They were characterized by having good science communication infrastructure, high degree of political attention to the issue, many actors involved, strong tradition of science communication, high public interest in science and technology, fair to high number of science journalists who are enjoying sufficient professional supporting and training. The developing group showed improvement on 1 or more of the parameters, especially infrastructure, political attention, or academic tradition of science communication. They also had medium to high number of actors involved, low number of science journalists, and low public interest. Now let's look at the fragile cluster. It showed poor infrastructure, lack of actors involved, low interest in communication from the academic community, low public interest in science, and lack of science journalism. Now, when I look at these 2 groups of criterions, and I'm asking myself, where really should Israel be placed? Because if we look at the criterion of improvement on 1 or more parameters, I think we can definitely say that we see improvement in political attention to science communication. And I guess the best evidence for that being the involvement of the Israeli National Academy of Science in these conferences. About the academic tradition, I don't know if we can say that we see a better academic tradition of science communication, or are we still with the low interest from the academic community? I guess they will tell about that. But I definitely can say that we have medium to high number of actors involved, even sitting in this room. Also, I think we can say that we have low number of science journalists, but not a complete lack of science journalists. Again, some of them sitting here. So if in 2010, when the report was researched, we were clustered into the fragile science communication culture, I think that maybe in 2013, we can say that we are in this cluster of developing science communication culture, and I can also hope that in the future, we would find ourselves where we want to be, in the consolidated cluster. And now, after this really brief overview, I wish to call to the stage our moderator, Owen Halman. Owen is a professor of the history of science at Bar-Ilan University. He is a popular science writer. One of his books, The Price of Altruism, George Price and the Search for the Origins of Kindness, won the 2010 Los Angeles Times Books Prize in the category of Science and Technology. Owen. Our panelists, as you heard, are part of a special delegation, the first international science journalism mission to Israel, organized by the Israel Academy of Science and Humanities and the Jerusalem Press Club in Mishkenot Sha'ananim, and I hope that many more such delegations will follow. So please join us, Dr. Jorge Cham from the USA. Creator of PhD Comics, the popular comic strip about life in academia that many of us know. He's also co-founder of PhD TV, a video science and discovery outreach collaboration. Sasha Kalman, that you already met, co-founder of German Science Journalism and a former member at the Night Science Journalism program at the MIT. Fabio Torone, editor of the Joy for Science and Medical Information based in Milan, and the president of the Professional Association of Science Writers in Italy. Lucy Calderon-Pineda, freelance journalist. Lucy is a freelance journalist for SciDevNet and the vice president of the World Federation of Science Journalists. Until very recently, she had worked in the most widely read newspaper in Guatemala for 13 years. Martin Schneider, please join us. Martin Schneider is the chairman of the German Science Journalists Association, WPK. Mr. Schneider is the deputy head of the science department of SWR Television, which is part of the public German television. Now, the closest thing that we in Israel have to science department of the public broadcast station is our local representative, Itai Nevo. Editor and science reporter in Kol Israel Radio, who is also an important member of the organization committee of this conference. So thank you. Please,
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Ayelet and the organizing committee for organizing this and bringing us all together. Now, in thinking about science communication or popularization of science, I'm sometimes reminded of an old joke about a new inmate who arrived in prison. And that evening, when the lights go down, he suddenly hears people in adjacent cells screaming out numbers. So someone screams out, 88, and then everyone starts laughing. Everyone, and there's silence again. Someone screams out, 44, and a great big ball of laughter comes out. So, trying to ingratiate himself with his new, and he asks his cellmate, what's happening here? And he says, well, we've been here for so long that we don't tell the jokes, we just say their number. and so, figuring that he'd ingratiate himself in his new environment, he decides to step into the fray and screams out 93. And there's complete silence in the chambers. So he screams out again 93. Complete silence. And he looks over at his cellmate and says, what's the problem? He said, you just didn't tell the joke right. In some sense, the scientists are the inmates, and the new kids on the block are the science communicators. And in a way, the joke is on all of us, because it turns out that communicating science well is actually very difficult. So the way I want to sort of arrange this panel today, since there are a lot of speakers and we have representatives from different countries and different media, so it should be a very interesting afternoon, is to do the following. I've asked each one of the participants to give us sort of a sculpted and as much as possible pointed version of their personal philosophy of the communication of science in 5 minutes. You each have 5 minutes, and the idea of what I wrote in the email to all of you was to try to address your comments with the following questions: how and why did you end up in the field? Why do you think the field is important? And what have been the greatest challenges to you personally? So we'll start by that in order to sort of get to know who we are. And then we should have about 45 minutes left afterwards to talk about audiences, who should be the audiences, different media, how they work, different media work in science communication, about training of science communicators, national styles, and the ultimate goals of the entire enterprise. So I think we'll just go chronologically. Okay. Signal that maybe we should start at the other end. So we'll start with Itai Nebo, your personal philosophy of science communication in 5 minutes. And please, I'd ask the participants to try to stick to the 5-minute limit.
Okay. I got into science communication pretty much by incident or accident. I was a student of biology, and when I finished it, I got into journalism. I'm a full-time news editor at the Israeli Public Radio, and a few years ago I also took on the science coverage because nobody did it. I felt it was important, you know? And in the last 3 years or so, I felt 2 jobs are not enough. I also took on a science blog in the radio's website, in which I cover science news, science history, trying to focus on the scientific aspects of the news topics, such as chemical weapons or taser guns, which we recently discussed in the media. Why is science communication important? I'm not sure. I'm not even sure it is important. As Professor Safir mentioned earlier, I'm not sure that more science coverage actually brings more funds into science. I don't know if better science coverage actually convinces kids to become scientists eventually. But I think the passion that drives me, and I dare to say my colleagues, is the passion to bring a good story, an interesting story. The science has plenty of that. And the science communicators will have the tools to mediate this story to a wider audience. And this brings us to the next topic, which is a challenge. It really is a major challenge to take a very complicated story or a scientific issue and try to bring it in an interesting way and reach as wide audience as possible. This is the first challenge. I'm a very boring person myself, so trying to write or report in an interesting way is a big challenge for me. Another challenge that makes my life very difficult is working in the radio. Because of all media, radio is the most limited one we have. To try to present a scientific topic in a time frame of 2-3 minutes, using only words, no visuals at all, no pictures, no video, just words. And it's not easy to take a topic, put it into context, explain it, and get to a certain point in a very tight time frame. So this is also one of the challenges I'm trying to tackle every day. I hope I'm doing reasonably well. And the last major challenge, which I'm finding myself confronting more and more recently, is lack of desire of the management of the institute I'm working in to give support to science reporting. I get less and less space to do scientific communication work, and I think this is a major problem, not only in the Israeli public radio, but in all Israeli media.
Okay, thank you, Itai. And Martin, I'd just like to remind everyone, Martin is the chairman of the German Science Journalists Association, and he works with public in TV and the science department.
Yeah, but I started kind of in another area, of course, and I think I just learned I'm in a developed or consolidated country. Maybe my background, my history can be understood only on the background of this situation. When I started back in the 80s working in science communication and science journalism, for that I studied biology and philosophy, and just by chance in this field. My task was, and I think that was a task of most of the science reporters back then, to translate the things the scientists do in their ivory towers to the public, because back then scientists were not trained to talk to the public. It was not good for them. So, several scientists thought that it was not good for their career if they talk in an understandable manner, and so people were needed to translate what they do. There was somebody in Germany coined the word of a transmission belt. Science journalist, a science reporter is a kind of transmission belt from the ivory tower to the public, because the scientists themselves could not do that. And I started with the attitude to communicate, to translate science. And when I started in the first 2 years, I worked in the press department of the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, which is a research granting foundation organization that grants to universities, and worked besides that as a freelancer, as a journalist. And I did not see any problems with it, because it was the same for me, since communication, doing the press work for the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, and working as a science reporter. But then, and that might be the developing things which took place in the 90s in Germany and the end of the 80s, scientists themselves learned to communicate better. There were great efforts made in Germany. There was an initiative called Public Understanding of Science and the Humanities. There was a grant for scientists who could communicate, given €50,000, I think, for one scientist a year who communicates in a good manner. And besides that, the press departments of the research facilities professionalized quite a lot more people working for it, writing very good press releases which could be printed as articles. And you see, the task as a reporter, bringing it to the public, was done by the scientists themselves. You might think that's a good thing. Of course it is. To get, everybody knows that science and technology is very important for a society like Germany, which has not so many natural resources and so on. But the side effects were seen very soon, because all the press departments are a kind of marketing department too of their research facilities. And more, we saw, or they put the research of their institutes in a brighter light than might be from a neutral point of view. And now a new role arose for science journalists. It was clear that science journalists had to be journalists in the first place, and they had to put all the journalistic tenets to the field of science, like uncovering hidden interest, for instance. Why is this news brought, this press release made? Because, of course, this institution wants to get more money from the government. They have a good name in the public. And I think that is the challenges we face now in Germany. Of course, science journalists are closer to scientists than any other journalist, but of course we are journalists, and we have to trim down some sensational findings which are reported to us by the press departments. And so that's the thing. Might be Israel might face if it is in a consolidated country too.
Thank you very much. I was once shot at on the Pan-American Highway on the way to Hachet, and I'm very glad that I get to talk about it and to tell everyone that Guatemala is a very beautiful country. Welcome. And again, Lucy Calderon Pineda is the General Editor of the Leaders Development Department of Plants and Plants.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share with you. I'm a professional journalist with a bachelor's degree in science communication from Universidad de San Carlos de Guatemala. However, before getting my university qualification, I gained industry experience at the cultural section of the most widely read daily newspaper in Guatemala City. It was 1998, and at the end of that year, and because of my performance, I was asked to join as photographer and reporter the Buena Vida section, Good Life in English, that aims to investigate about health, environment, human relationships, science and education, to provide readers with tools and information about how to deal with family problems, diseases, emotional situations, among others. That is how I started as a reporter and to write science and technology stories. I must confess that from the beginning, I loved what I did, because while doing this job, you have the opportunity to meet many people, to learn every day from different situations, and the best of all is that while doing what you love and what you enjoy, you receive a payment. Not too much, but you receive it. As I always like to go forward, and in order to add a plus to my articles, while working in Prensa Libre, I struggled to get permissions to attend to workshops and seminars, because it's the only way that reporters of light sections, as my colleagues used to say and to call the department I worked for, can improve their abilities and knowledge about the topics we report. Then I won some scholarships related specifically with science journalism. These scholarships allowed me to grow in both professional and personal ways. The first one was the Jack F. Ely Workshop on Science Journalism, promoted by the Mexican Ely Foundation at the Institute of the Americas in San Diego, California. The second one was the workshop Science in the Media, the challenges of scientific journalism in Iberoamerica, held in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, Bolivia. During this workshop, the organizers presented the results of a research about how many science news published the daily newspaper in Latin America. And they did not mention Guatemala. So I asked myself, why not? Guatemala is the biggest country in Central America. I worked in that time, for the largest daily newspaper, and we have a daily full-color page where we mainly publish articles about health. And as I had with me some PDF of my reports, of my articles, I asked the opportunity to show them. And when I came back to Guatemala, I decided that I had to do something. I thought Guatemala has good scientists. Science is not only from developed countries. And I proposed to my editor to investigate and write about local science. He smiled to me and said, okay, you can do it twice a month. Because he believed I couldn't find stories, good news. I did the Science and Technology in Guatemala page for 3 consecutive years. And it was the door that opened to me many wonderful opportunities to learn and share experiences about science journalism worldwide. For instance, since 2008, I was asked to teach at a private university a short seminar about science journalism. Then I was encouraged to apply as a board member of the World Federation of Science Journalists, and I won the position. In 2009, I became secretary, and last June I was promoted to vice president. Of course, I could never forget that in 2007, I was also selected as one of the 14 journalists from all over the world and the only Latin American to board the Canadian Coast Guard ship Amundsen to report about the impacts of climate change in the Arctic. That was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. So, science journalism is highly important to promote and to increase the scientific culture of your country, especially when you live in a less developed one. Through your chronicles, interviews, articles, or the journalistic piece that you design, you can let your audiences know who, what, how, where, and why science is happening in your country, and what will be the implications. It can also help to encourage children and young students to take an interest in science, to choose a scientific career, and to discover that scientists are normal people, that they do not make magic, and that you can also become one of them. scientific stories can give a breath of new life to your readerships, more in Latin America, where our audiences are sick of reading, listening, or watching stories about crimes, narcotics, corruption, and injustice. And what have been my greatest challenges? As everything in life, nothing is free or easy. To be a science journalist is something hard. Most of the time you are alone. You have to fight to get your stories published, to get permission to attend workshops or seminars to strengthen your knowledge base. The majority of editors think that science does not sell. Who cares about science? They do not believe in local science. And unfortunately, in Central America, there is not a specialization about science journalism. Personally, even my colleagues thought that I was always having fun when attending to conferences like this. After I left the newspaper, no one continued with the Guatemalan Science and Technology page. I believe that was a shame, because the inclusion of scientific-based articles adds to a more comprehensive range of topics for any leading newspaper. That is why I recently launched my website. It is called Ecociencia GT, ecosciencegt.com. And because I want to continue doing what I love, investigating and writing about Guatemalan science, technology, environment, and innovation. However, it is not easy because I need to find a way to make it sustainable. And as I also want to help other colleagues who are interested in science journalism, it is necessary to work harder. So if you have any ideas, suggestions, or comments about how to make it sustainable, the ideas are more than welcome. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Fabio, who is the president of the Science Writers Academy.
Well, I was asked, as everyone else, to explain in a biographical way my science communication technology. And the first thing that I thought is that I'm not a science communicator. I was surprised to see that Italy stays in the more established science communication. But maybe I'm still reflecting about that, and I probably got to the conclusion, the temporary conclusion, that what Martin described also applies to Italy, which means that from the point of view of those willing to have more science in the media, from a quantitative point of view, it's true. We have lots of science-related stuff in the media. I wouldn't say that it's good science communication, and especially I wouldn't say that it's good science journalism. I feel personally much more a journalist, and I try to sculpt the biographical story by starting from a picture. My wife, who comes from a Jewish family, has taught me in a way to look at the history of the families in a way that I didn't consider that much. But I can focus on a specific picture of my great-grandfather and my great-grandfather from the side of my mother and my father reading a daily newspaper, both concentrated on the newspaper on two different chairs. And I thought about that picture as, in a way, the symbol of what I had to do in my life to become relevant and interesting and important. My great-grandfather was a journalist in the beginning and then became one of the most outstanding political figures in the Socialist Party in Italy. His name was Pietro Nenni. And he was, of course, a political journalist. He fought against fascism. By the way, one of his daughters died in Auschwitz, and I thought it was relevant to say it here among the political journalists, political prisoners. My mother, who was his direct niece, was also a journalist in the times of the feminism fight for women's rights in Italy, and my father was also a political journalist. So in a way, I was still trying to decide what I would do in my life, and I thought that being a journalist was a profession, but I didn't want to be the son of, or the parent, or the family member of. So I didn't look for a career, but it stumbled upon me when they proposed me to go to contribute to a monthly science popularization journal in Rome. And I went there just to earn a little money, helping with the proofs and sub-editing. Then, after a couple of years, I was studying at the university with not much interest because there is no career for journalism in the university in Italy, and there is no science journalism, especially now in the recent years there are more science communication courses. And then, at the time, I'm speaking about some 22, 24 years ago, I knew that in order to become a journalist, I needed to find someone hiring me with a special kind of contract, because the access to the journalistic profession in Italy is by doing, not from academic training. And I was suggested to apply for a post in Milan, which implied to move, in order to become a trainee journalist, and it was in a weekly magazine for general practitioners. So I moved there with the idea of learning, of getting the possibility to sustain the state examination in order to become a professional journalist. And while I was in Milan, I discovered the difficulty for medicine, it was a journal, a weekly magazine for general practitioners, to become more scientific. It was the beginning of the movement of the so-called evidence-based medicine. And the point was basically providing physicians with the best available evidence, while the physicians who consider themselves, in a way, scientists, were acting much more on unreliable evidence. So in a way, it was like what I had done as a conscientious objector. I refused the draft in Italy, and I spent 1 year in the Consumers Association defending the rights of the weak people. And I felt like, in a way, my duty was to provide news as a tool to empower the readers, first the physicians and the readers. So another thing that I learned was that in the beginning, physicians didn't like the idea that the epidemiologists and the biostatisticians should have the last word on what's effective and what's not effective in clinical medicine. But in the last 20 years, you probably witnessed the same things in Israel. It's now much more obvious that a clinical trial, even the best possible clinical trial, is still not the last word on the efficacy and effectiveness of a drug. So in a way, to sum up and to conclude, the philosophy that I have crafted about not much science communication, but science journalism, borrows from the famous aphorism from Winston Churchill, which is that science is the worst system to understand the world we live in, except that all other systems that have been tried. So I think that the goal, the main duty of science journalism is reminding people and scientists that science is the best we have, but it's far from perfect. So I think that this is something that when we see science in the dailies in Italy, it's most of the time badly treated, and it's from the perspective of the controversy, not starting from science, and science is called to justify itself or to provide an explanation of a question which is not a scientific question, more and more a societal question. And we need all to learn how to build trust, which was mentioned this morning as one of the goals of science. And I think that the most difficult part in the relationship between science and the media professionals is working on building trust while being critical.
Thank you, Fabio. Sasha, co-founder of the German Science Journalism Network.
Yes, which translates to interface, just to say it.
Thank you, because in Israel, it's not the same one.
Okay, so I hope to be shorter than 5 minutes because you already heard a little bit about me. Yeah, I would like to start actually with the fascination of science, because that struck me some the reporting about a Nobel Prize on photosynthesis, and I started to read the headlines in the newspaper as a, I don't know, 15 or 16 or something. This was my age at that time or so, and I wondered, okay, why these reports were so different. Sometimes they didn't even report it seemingly about the same thing, but it was the same Nobel Prize. So, and I started thinking about this might be actually a nice field to go into. So, to report about this fascinating science and to study biology before that, because I thought it might be a good idea to know something before I write about something. And so I started my biology studies actually with the idea to become a science journalist. So I got distracted, as you already saw, with Drosophila genetics, which is extremely fascinating and but also tedious. So I came back to science journalism, idea, and started also with an idea to better communicate what's really going on in science. After I ended my biology studies, I switched to science journalism year, teach at the same university, and there I learned that the view of a journalist is completely different from a scientist, and I started to think about that, and this was really very helpful to get started. And I would like to give you an example of why science and science communication, science journalism might be different, because it's not that people just need to understand what science is about or so, but journalism also needs to tell scientists what the society needs and does not need, so that scientists perhaps really reflect what they are actually doing and how they promote their findings. I now live in an area in Berlin where the Fritz Haber Institute is. He was a chemist, a famous chemist, I think actually a Jew, and he invented Senfgas, I don't know the translation actually. So, his wife killed herself because she couldn't live with the idea that her husband was involved in producing this gas for the First World War and later for other purposes, as we all know. So, and this is a direct influence of science on human beings, and I think that scientists also have a responsibility, and journalism is a way to make them think about that. Even before they make technologies, and just to say, okay, if I wouldn't have invented it, then someone else would have done it. So that is not really the way to go on with that for the next 1,000 years or so. So the other part I want to say is science sometimes changes humans in a way we just don't think about it. So every one of you has an iPhone or something like that, different brand, in your pocket, so it changed your life. And in this area here, the fertile crescent, people started to, 10,000 years ago, started to culture plants and breed animals, cows and whatever, at their homes, and it changed their life completely. So we profit of that, of course, but it changed us not only cultural, but also in a genetic way. So a lot of people in Europe are now lactose tolerant. This would have never happened if there wouldn't have been this technology, early biotechnology you could call it. The decision to take animals in your home and drink their milk and so on. So that this was a biotechnology at the time. It's archaic, I know, but it's biotechnology. So it changed our genes, actually. So on the other hand, science, in my view, and you already said this with this great Churchill quote, is, I think, the only way, the tools of science to gain knowledge is the only way we can deal with societal problems. For example, to distinguish between quackery and real therapies or so. If someone tells you, if you just look at the stone, then the waves of the stone, transcendental, I don't know, really would heal you cancer. So the only way to prove this guy wrong is using science. So I think to just alone explain the principles of science in journalistic articles might help to come to better society decisions. And the last question, what has been the greatest challenge to you personally, is very easy to answer with one word: money.
Mr. Cham is the creator of PhD Comics and the co-founder of PhD.
Well, I guess, you know, if my philosophy is that I like schnitzel also. But, you know, I came to science communication a little bit by accident also. That seems to be kind of a trend. I guess nobody really wants to do it because there's no money, but you yeah, so I'm actually a cartoonist. I draw cartoons, I draw comics, and kind of in the process of doing that, I found myself talking a lot to scientists and researchers and academics and humanities and social science. And so in addition to the sort of the regular comics that I made, I would draw comics about having conversations with all these scientists and researchers. And often they would kind of go into what they were doing research on and why they were doing it. So that's kind of how I got started for me. I guess if I had some sort of philosophy, or I guess what I've sort of learned from experience is that, you know, I guess from my point of view, I think scientists and researchers should be the ones doing a lot of the science communication, should be the ones that are talking about what they're doing. For a couple of reasons. First, I think that they're the best qualified to really communicate the passion behind it. So like if you're a scientist and you spend 20 years of your life working on this one little thing, you know, there must be a reason for it. And, you know, there must be some sort of passion or some sort of something that inspires them to do it. So for me, like getting that out of the scientist or the researcher is pretty cool, and I think a good way to find that and to communicate it to the public. But also I think it's important because it allows the public to connect directly to the scientist and the researcher. You know, I think that's something that's really missing, which I'll talk a little bit more about later today. But yeah, I think that kind of personal connection is very important, not just so that the public kind of understands who is doing this research and who are they and why are they doing it, but also kind of, as you guys mentioned, is so that the scientists also can feel more connected to the public, more responsible to them. Yes, that was.
Okay. So the picture that we see is that we sort of run the gamut from everywhere from the guy who said that science communication, he's actually not sure whether or not science communication is all that important, to others who think that it's actually crucial to the constitution of the nation and the education of civilians and so forth. But whether or not you believe that there is an intrinsic importance and whether you have different views on the subject, all of us, when we're writing a journalistic piece or an article or making a TV show or a film or drawing a cartoon, are engaging in a kind of trade-off. And I'd like to start the discussion talking about trade-offs. We were talking about this morning with my students. because of the limitation of either time or space, you're going to have to make decisions about what way do you want to give to exposition versus criticism. What way do you want to give to teaching versus entertaining? In a very real sense, I think, specifically with science, there's a kind of inverse relationship between relevance and rigor. The more rigorous something is, the less relevant it is to a popular audience. But first and foremost, I think the first trade-off that we make is between audiences. And what I'd like, and the question that I'd like to pose to the panel is, who is your imagined audience? And is your imagined audience different from your perceived audience and your de facto audience? Clearly, this is related to your philosophy of what science communication is for. But for instance, in my case, I often think when I'm writing that I'd like a very smart 14-year-old who knows nothing about the subject that I'm writing to turn the page when he's reading my art. That's my imagined audience. So just to begin with, I'd like your comments. Who are you writing for, or making television shows for, or drawing for?
Well, I think some of your comments at the beginning about the importance of science are important. I think this might be a digression, but I think that this idea that it's important for scientists to be kind of made sure that they're neutral and balanced in their communication is important. But I think in sort of today's world with the internet, where it's kind of possible for you to get so many different sides of any issue available to you on the internet, where it's possible for you to actually choose what sort of side you want to be on before you even get the information, and then just read the information that supports your opinion beforehand. I think it's important for people to be more educated about science so that they can make those decisions about what is right and what is wrong, and not fall into that easy path now where you can just go and read things that support what you already believe. Yeah, sorry, what was the question? Audiences, yeah. Audiences, yes.
As you asked for television, I can answer the question quite exactly, because we have quite exact media research done with our broadcast, and it's exactly, we have exactly, with our science shows, exactly the same audience than any other show, any other program on television. Although you might think doing this stuff that there are special people watching this, more educated people or something like that. No, that's not the case. If we do a program which is only accessible for people with a specific education, academic education or something, or at least people being already interested in science, then we do not have so much viewers, and that's that's not good for us in the long run. So we have to have on our mind that ordinary people, normal people, must be interested.
Right. We're going to get later to the question of national styles of science communication, but I was just wondering across countries whether there are particular targeted audiences. For instance, that that radio listeners in Italy would be interested in science happen to be a demographic of age 55 to 75, and therefore you point your.
Well, I would like to answer your question by not answering your question, but by showing you that your question is mixing. You talk about media and you talk about science communication. And since I agree totally with Sasha when he said that one of the main problems is money, I have had a particularly peculiar history, professional history, because I went to Milan to become a professional journalist, and it implies 2 years as a trainee, and while those 2 years were finishing, I basically, along with part of my colleagues, lost my job. So I didn't have any salary anymore, and we created a small agency, news agency specialized in science. And since then, more than 20 years ago, I realized that my main goal was, from a Darwinistic point of view, surviving. And the point changes completely, because you don't have to imagine, what you ask is probably worked in the United States, where you have a huge potential market of people reading English all over the world, and then you can choose your niche. In a country like Italy, you have already a smaller market in the beginning, few people paying to read something, and then you have to learn that if you want to get paid, you have to aim the specific audiences of those specific journals. I freelance for a lot of newspapers, weeklies, monthly magazines, and so on. And I know that my goal as a journalist is pitching the good story for the good outlet. I know and I teach everyone I can, to those willing to get into journalism, that they need to learn that there is no such thing as the good outlet. You need to be good enough for the kind of outlet you are aiming to be published in, and then the editor sets the rules. You may gain little by little more independence in pitching and proposing an angle, but the point is that if you don't pass beyond the editor, you're not getting published. So whatever you think in theory needs to be put at the proof of fact. And my personal perception is that in Italy, what is more easily published is quite low level, very entertaining stories, which sometimes I happen to write on specific issues. But one of the great problems is that when it comes to science journalism, you typically don't, you see, most people are just doing like scientists happen to do. They just keep applying the same tools without reflecting too much on how right it is. They learn that they need to publish, and they learn how they can publish, and they publish. Not always wondering how important is this specific stuff. And if you want to also have a point of view on what Jorge said, if you have spent 20 years of your life on some subject, you are the least relevant people to tell other people how important your research might be, because you are so much involved that you cannot throw your 20 years out of the window admitting that you're going nowhere. So someone else should be a filter to tell people, okay, he spent his life, he's done a good job, but then what we can do, what he studied, is not so relevant, not always so relevant. So to finish up, I am heated, as you can probably feel, because typically I listen to theoretical discourses about the ideal science communication, while I am living and struggling to live in a context, in an environment in which the money goes to science, that then spends it on science communication, which erodes the margins of autonomy of science journalism. So, and we still get back to the money. And I need to go where the money is, which also implies, I admit it, to not always be at the top of the idealistic standards of best science journalism, because you have to work with those who ask you to write something and you say, I don't like it, I would prefer to this angle, and the editor says, no, I want this angle, and you do your best. But then that's where your work becomes professional. And we can open up the issue of bloggers, if you want, which is a whole other can of worms.
I think when we discuss the audience of science communication, we often tend not to consider the serious part of this audience is scientists. I always try to simplify my items as much as I can. Find myself writing and rewriting to make it sound simpler and understandable to a wider audience. But naturally, I realize that many of those reading comment are scientists, not necessarily from the same field. I dare to take a wild guess that most people here are science affiliated, so to say, read about the Higgs boson, not from the scientific articles, but from the public communications and other.
And also about the superluminal neutrinos.
Yeah, if they work. So if I take on Martin's example, I think science communication is not just a transmission belt from the ivory tower to the public audience. It's a transmission belt from one ivory tower to other ivory towers. And some of it eventually falls around to the wider audience who is interested in science.
Okay. But historically, I mean, science communicators, even science journalists, are quite a new profession. It's not that they didn't exist 30, 40, 50 years ago. But when science was communicated to large audiences, mainly in the 20th century, it was done principally by scientists. And when you look at bestsellers, most of the bestsellers have been written by scientists who decided to popularize their ideas. Now, if there's a consensus among us in this panel that it's a good thing that scientists communicate their ideas, and those who are good at it should do it, and that's wonderful, but that it shouldn't be left to scientists, then the question beckons, is there a way to train science communicators? And you rightly say that at the end of the day, the buck stops with the editor, but if enough people are trained in the field, you know, they will come up and some of them will become editors and they'll understand how to write about science more clearly. But then the question is, how do we train? Is there a way to train science communicators?
I don't want to monopolize, but just to make a point, the National Association of Science Writers in the United States was established in 1932. So it also depends on countries. And I think that the request by journalists to have a say in science comes from very far away in the past. Then the issue is power. Society pays money, gives money to science. Then science has more money, more visibility, more influence, more credibility in the beginning. And that's why it's much easier for a scientist in Italy to say stupid things about whatever, because he's a public figure, he's very famous, and nobody questions that what he says is totally stupid, except a few journalists, because he is a scientist. And maybe he won a Nobel Prize sometimes. We have examples. And still, they are not asked to be, I mean, to stick to their science or to be scientists even when they comment as anyone else would do, because they have this, they become testimonials. That's the part of science communication that I don't like. But I would like to, that society question more often.
Right, so we return to the problem that indeed, if we leave science communication to the scientists, then there are obvious pitfalls, and that there's something about the purchase of being a scientist which allows a leeway which we should be critical of. And one of the best watchdogs for that kind of criticism is a professional class of science communicators who are not scientists. So again, I return to the question of training. If anyone has any thoughts about, should there, I mean...
I can provide you another example from my country. I am the course director of a summer school of science journalism in Sicily. I am very proud of it, and I earn zero money from that work. Because the money goes to the fellowships to have attendance, because otherwise you would have, and I like it, but I would like to find a sustainable way. Then the founders of the school are the National Institute of Nuclear Physics and the director of the project is a physicist, and he considers that you don't need to be paid for that. You just have to be... They have already their salary for doing something else, and when they do it, it's on the side, but they still have a salary for being a scientist. If they take a leave for teaching somewhere, they still get paid, which is not the case with a freelancer like me. So that's a clash. And another important issue, and that's why I stop me because I talk too much. But another important issue is that in Italy, we decided to establish an association of science writers to provide training among peers. And this is an effort we are doing, and we are trying at the European level, at the world level, to get a say. Because in Italy we have the academic science communication departments that also get money from the European Commission to take part in dissemination projects, which are not really much journalism, that's selling European research. And they hire science journalists to become PR people. So, but they take the place because then the newspapers who have little money, they say, I already have a good journalist, except that he's not doing the journalism at the moment. He's just selling his stuff, and he's being paid for by the producers of science. So that's a vicious circle. And I think it's, I mean, just to stress the point, I think it's so much important to have stronger national associations of science writers. In the United States, we have money to do beautiful things for science journalism.
Thank you.
Yes, perhaps we should think about that. Not all of the science reporting which is published every day in newspapers is written by science journalists or science communicators. It's usually these are just journalists who are writing these stories, and so they. I would say science journalists who name themselves science journalists already have a certain idea of how a topic like that, a complicated topic, should be written, and that there should be studies involved, experts, and stuff like that. So, but the usual journalist. In the morning, he writes a story about, I don't know, the political meeting of 3 parties or whatever, and in the afternoon, the science article. So these people are not trained on science specifically to work with that. So, and that's a regular problem, I think, in all countries. And at least in Germany, we try to address this problem with some tools. Perhaps Marty can tell a little bit more about that, but perhaps all of you, if you go to the website at MIT, the Night Tracker or so, they do something like peer review within science journalism. So they, it's a blog more or less, where certain science journalists review what other science journalists or journalists in general write about science topics. And they criticize that. Sometimes they also say that, yeah, like kind of reporting scandals also are reported there, so that wrong topics get corrected there and stuff like that. So, and there's another service in the US, the Health News Review, where some reviewers.
They ended up their money. Yes.
Okay, that's new for me, but at least we have a copy of that in Germany, and this is supported by the Just Presse Conference, where Martin is the head, and I'm one of the referees, more or less, who is reading articles who were published in German newspapers, and you judge these articles on a certain set of criteria, and then you give this judgment back to the editors and to the writers, so that they might rethink what they just published and perhaps establish some new rules for, in this case, medical reporting. Because we can go into details of these criteria, but the important thing is that how could you really teach editorial boards what they should do better with their reporting? There are not many ways, and the only thing is to make their mistakes visible. And we do this by a judgment. You can get 5 stars if you really get out a really good story, and 0 stars if it was a really bad thing. So, and this visibility, of course, at least makes editors to really rethink their organizational skills usually. So because sometimes they just copy-paste press releases into their newspapers. Or another case we had recently was that the pharma company paid for telephone setting, so where readers could call experts for a certain drug. And of course the experts were paid by the pharma company. So what did these experts tell these callers? And then after that they made an article out of that. And in the first, you read it, you see 4 or 5 experts mentioned in this article, and you think, okay, they really called a lot of people and 5 experts, that's nice. And then you dig deeper and see, okay, all these 5 experts are mentioned on the website of the pharma company and so on, and paid by the pharma company. So here you can see that these editorial boards really need to be aware of all these, working behind the.
So all of these examples that you're giving are really a sign of the weakness of the profession. When people write about politics, say, the head of the politics desk at a national newspaper, those people's eyes are usually trained in criticism. Their essence is not to take at face value what the politician tells them. Same thing for someone who's writing about religious affairs and so forth. And yet, one of the problems that seems to be rampant in science journalism is that because there is a lack of knowledge on the part of those reporting, and it's easier just to, basically to, like you said, cut and paste what the scientist says, that we have to guard against that type of wholesale swallowing of the science, on the one hand. On the other hand, there also is a problem that there is again, we'll talk about national culture in the time that we have left, but there is a bon ton in certain media in certain places to debunk scientists because of the cultural valence of the scientist in the 21st century. A lot of people are angry at the fact, or are critical of the fact that just because a scientist says something, then he can now say anything about politics, and everyone listens to him. And that every time you want to buy, a toothpaste, you open the television, the commercial is someone with a white coat, and because he has a white coat, then you're going to buy Colgate because clearly that guy knows what he's talking about. So we have these two ends. On the one hand, swallowing wholesale what scientists tell you as a communicator. On the other hand, being too critical. So in a way, the problem is to find a path, a midway, and I think you said it nicely, which is, on the one hand, to celebrate the achievements of science, because it is one of the greatest achievements. Technology and science are great achievements of the human race. On the other hand, to delimit the playing field on which scientific questions can be meaningfully asked. So, again, returning to the question of training, how do we train for that kind of middle way? Again, we don't expect someone who writes about politics to have been in the political system. Do we expect a science writer to have a first degree in science, for instance? Yes, Marvin and Lucy.
No, it does not come back to this example you just gave us. On a political show in the evening on television, it's not Mr. Netanyahu presenting this program, or it's not the head of a big company presenting the economical show. But in science, it's still sometimes the case. And the first science presenters on television, they were scientists themselves. There's something wrong with this picture. So I think it's not, you do not need a middle way between two ways. You need two ways. The one is training scientists to communicate. That's in Germany, nowadays it's obligatory. If you are a graduate, you have to take courses in communication. Journalists are coming, telling you how to write an article a normal person can read, giving a lecture. You have to do that, and it's it's part of your testimony. You have to do it. And I think we have to force scientists to talk about their topic because they get public money, and to give lectures to normal people. That's the one thing that can be improved. Give incentives like grant or prize for good communicators, and that's the one hand side. And the other side is improve journalism on science. Normal journalists, train them. What are the specific things science, with studies, and so when is a study right or wrong? Not only when a scientist tells you something, it's right because he is a scientist. Trust me, I'm a scientist. There are several opinions you have to distinguish between. We had it this morning, between important or interesting, who is tells the truth. Those are specific things taking place in science which do not take place, do not occur in politics in this case. So you need two ways: improve journalism specifically for science, and to train scientists during their graduate time in communicating.
Lucy?
I believe deeply that as scientist has a method, a scientific method for his or their research, they can also learn the journalistic method to write articles, chronicles, and everything, because writing is not as easy as people think. And I remember one time that one scientist asked me, "And did you go to university for being here interviewing me?" So I almost cried that day. But it is important, and I think that if universities and scientists are interested in promoting their jobs and getting more investment in science and technology, they have to learn to write and to communicate science to people. For example, in Guatemala City, there are only one person who writes about insects because he's an entomologist. But the funny thing is that he's not Guatemalan. He's from the United States, but at least he's doing that. And he's doing in a right way because he's entertaining, but he can write well. So I think that is important, that you can make appealing the story for the audiences and let them know why this is important, why this research is important, how it will affect your life. It's the only way you can get more audiences. For example, getting back to Guatemala and Central America, because it's the context that I know better, my challenge and my goal is to start promoting local science, because we have the thought that science is only from developed countries, and that is not true. So when people read about our achievements in a specific field, we have a response, we have a good response, because people want to know and they say, "Oh, we didn't know about it." And for example, the last project that I made was interviewing the scientist who has obtained the scientific medal of science and technology that is given by the government. For making these interviews, the presentation more attractive, we make cartoons from the scientists. And it was very interesting because scientists were wondering how they are going to draw me. And so it was very interesting, and people didn't know about them. So I think that it's a matter of passion. What do you want to do? Even you are a scientist or you are a journalist. Do you want to make something worldwide in this world? So if you have a very clear goal, you are going to do everything you can to get that achievement.
So I don't think we've quite answered the question of training, but you have sort of drawn us into the question of national styles of science communication. And what I want to ask the panel is, in different countries, in different places, in different times, people think differently about science as an enterprise. What does it mean to do science? Why is it meaningful? How is it constitutive of national character and so forth? What I want to ask you is, in what ways do you think is that sort of national perception of what science is, how is that national perception reflected in the way science is communicated in your different cultures? And I think that, I mean, it's clearly the case when you, I mean, smaller places that are, you know, slightly on the periphery, and I include Israel in that, because we are a small country. when someone wins a Nobel Prize, it's a national holiday and so forth. You know, it's very constitutive of our relationship to the greater world of knowledge and so forth. And so, in some ways, the way science is reported is related to that kind of a perception. I think that it's very different in the United States. And again, it changes across media. But I am curious about any thoughts that you might have. Yeah, Sasha.
I think it's a little bit. I think that at least in Germany, there is a market for science-related articles, just because a lot of people are well educated and have an interest in science. So, and this is the basis for my science journalism. It's not that probably the political view of Angela Merkel is that we need to get a better understanding of science in the population also, because it's important for economy and for the next 50 years or whatever. So, because this is a political view, and it might be true or not, I don't know. Germany depends on technology, of course, so it's perhaps important that people at least know something about it, but it's completely different from reporting about science, scientific issues, scientific discoveries, or so, from this political view of how important science journalism might be. It's just, it's a market. It's a market of publication, and because there is an interest in science, and I don't even like the idea of this push initiative. Also, it came from the US. Also, public understanding of science and humanities. Also, this is a top-down approach. It invented a lot of science communication, sometimes really bad stuff, thick brochures paid for thousands of euros or so, where scientists wrote stuff no one could really understand. I think that it was really a bad idea. And of course, science communication improved by its program or so, because some people actually learned how to communicate science or so. But it has, in my view, nothing to do with science journalism, because science journalism is market-based and interest-based from the readers. And we should much more think about what does the reader really want. I want to give one more example. At the public TV in Germany, for years and years, there were only tiny sections of science in the media. So these scientists who were reporting about science also. But then the private TV stations started kind of a science show in the prime time. At about 7 p.m. or so, and they were successful because people were just amazed by this kind of science reporting. I personally didn't like it so much because it was all this fascination-based reporting about science, very fast cuts and stuff like that. So I liked it a little bit different, but more longer documentaries. But only then the public TV realized that there might be a market for this, so that people are actually interested in science and actually understand what we are reporting about. So and now there are much more of these shows in Germany on TV. So we just need to trust a little bit more into the reader or the audience out there, because they are not as dumb as people.
So if we should trust the audience, I suggest we open up for some questions from you. We have about 7 minutes, so we can take some questions. Yes, sir.
My name is Avik, and I think I have something unique. I don't know whether to do something like that in the world. I have a science news site looking for German people. I try to update daily on several items about news, and also helped by volunteers like Kai, Green, Sinclair, and others. And try to give the audience things about everything about the environment, about space, about genetic engineering. First of all, is there something like that in your countries? And second, second I will explain.
There are sites like this, and we didn't finish the point of targeted audience. That would be the point I just talked about television, that it is the normal audience we have. But I think there is a targeted audience, especially on the web. There are blogs, of course, that's an interesting other field too. Blogging scientists, journalists, no economics, but they are not scientists on the blog. And on the internet, I think you can go for targeted audiences, and you will have quite a lot of viewers who are very interested in the new scientific findings.
What is the second question? What is the economic model of volunteering like partnership or something else?
I think it's very hard to make a living with it. There are some foundations giving money. Now, what is Science Labs? Like you might know, how is it financed? The blog platform for different
advertising. So basically no payment. So that's still the biggest problem. So people I think all these websites, I think there are some successful examples in the US. You can recommend that. So your website, whether you get some advertising payments or so, I don't know, but because this market is much bigger. The English language is a much bigger market, but in Germany, despite Germans and Switzerland and Austria about 100 million or so, it's still not enough to address tinier audiences and make a living of it. Not for a single person, so it's just not working yet. But I'm thinking that there will grow some new models. For example, I shouldn't say this right now, but ideas like doing magazines on the iPhone or so, where you pay about $1 for every article that is interesting for you. And this might really be a way where people pay anyway with their phone contract or whatever, or it's easy to just click a button and pay something on your iTunes account or so to pay for these articles. So I think it's still a technical thing, how easy it is to make some revenue of the articles you publish there.
The only other time that I have now is spammers or Google ads or something like that. It's not enough to put even one person, not the whole operation. All staff are volunteers.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions, so Ayala can do this gentleman.
It seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that the people from the consolidated countries were talking about the problem with the difference between science journalism and science communicators not clear enough, that people do PR while they should be doing journalism, while the people from the, I don't know where your country would be, but in fragile, developing science communication culture, we're actually hoping there will be any science in the media for a start, that they will have somewhere to publish and that there will be science journalism. And I was wondering, asking you, if we actually get to that level that we have the infrastructure, will we be thinking about the same things as you? Is that like the second phase of...
Short answer, definitely. Yes, and that's a good thing. It's really a good thing. Science aims it's coming to its final point where it should be in journalism, just a normal place in society.
And I can add, because I have also worked with the Science Media Center in the United Kingdom, which is a specific experience, very interesting and important, that I agree that you should expect such a kind of backlash once you become visible, because now you have the problem of not feeling visible enough as a scientific community. Then it will be immediate for anyone, the perception. In every controversy, the voice of science is heard much more. In the United Kingdom, they had trouble with too much so-called pseudoscience in the media in the year 2000. And the parliament had hearings, and they finally set up this Science Media Center, which has, in my personal perception, produced good results in terms of building trust between selected scientists, which are now more and more, and selected members of the media. Putting them together in the same room in small numbers, because being in small numbers is needed in order to not only grow professionally, creating an occasion to learn, but also to establish a trust relationship, which then helps you when the mud hits the fan, to use a journalistic expression. And doing this outside of the crisis helps be ready for the moment in which the crisis arrives. We have plenty of examples of crisis. One is currently going on in Italy about the stem cell pseudotherapy being marketed, and we are spending public money, a lot of public money on that. And we have several more examples. But the UK, which has a science journalism community, a much stronger science journalism community, reacted even to the Science Media Center. So part of the science journalism is very friendly. Part is critical, because, and I think it's healthy, as long as you have, enough, because of course having only one voice is out of bounds.
Okay, so one last question.
My name is Doug. I'm with the press office at University, and my question is about bloggers. How do you define the difference between a science journalist and a science blogger? What do you think of science bloggers? Is the difference really relevant anymore, given how the internet's taking over? And how do you recommend someone like me to relate to people who blog about science?
Good luck making money, I guess.
I think the main difference would be whether the division has to do with news-related work. I expect journalists to focus on news, while bloggers can focus on a whole lot of other issues, social, giving a broader perspective of science, not necessarily focus on what's new. But there are blogs that do science news, and they're not technically different from journalistic old-style work. Really depends on the blogger and where they go.
Maybe I can add that that's the exciting thing at the moment. I think there is no answer at the moment. There are just forming new role models. Scientists, a blogging scientist, a press officer, a science journalist. The blogger has some candidates of journalists, some candidates of scientists too, and of course it's always his opinion. So that's the main thing, which a journalist should not only tell other people his opinion. There are other tenets, journalistic tenets, but he shares some tenets with the blogger. And so I think it's a very exciting time at the moment in the field of science. Bloggers, scientists, press officers, science journalists. Yeah.
I think well, I think one of the most popular bloggers about science online right now is a site called pardon my language, I effing love science. I don't know how many of you know this, but it has like 8 million followers. Okay, good. Excellent. Yeah, she seems like a really great person. But it's interesting because she's 8 million followers. That's like orders of magnitude probably of the next science blogger. But it's interesting because it's not even a blog. She just posts pictures that I don't know if she owns or not, but she posts pictures. And she just writes a quote or some sort of like 2 sentences on it, and that's what people want to consume, or that's what people have time to consume in a way. So I think that's kind of an interesting gauge of the market on what people have time and interest to consume about science.
Okay, so we're out of time.
I just add one suggestion. The distinction is 3 trivial in some countries. I have a press card which I can call myself professional journalist until the end of my life. Whatever I do in my life, even if I start selling fish. Nobody will withdraw it except in very rare cases. I'm partly joking, but in Italy that's the way it works. In other countries you need to have a press card by working with the media and asking access. Where the distinction is blurred, my suggestion is to look at the ecosystem and to do whatever doesn't hurt the existing ecosystem of science journalism. So if the blogger, who is a scientist or whatever, doing this as a hobby, might undermine professional media who works better because they just put out the press releases without comment, without adding any value, they are not worth, in my view, receiving materials. If they add some value, distinction might be more complex. If they start to get into competition with professionals, the situation gets even more complex. So it needs to be evaluated case by case, in my view.
Okay, so I'd like to thank our panel members, and just to end together, I think, with Martin's comment that it really is a very interesting time at the moment, just because the different media that we use to consume science are developing at a very fast pace, and it seems as if those media will be used by different types of science communicators, and that's a good thing. Scientists who are able to write or communicate their own ideas or colleagues' ideas and do so well, that is a blessing, in my opinion. Bloggers who are interested in science and try to get other people interested in science as well. Historians of science, philosophers of science who write in magazines or speak on television. And then what will, we hope, increasingly become a professionalized class of science communicators who are not working for any interest, or any monetary or science interest of one form or another, but rather are actually proper journalists. That efflorescence of science communicators will only enrich the public's understanding of science, and it remains to be seen how exactly it will happen. But in any case, thank you very much for your time.